Just following up on my Florida Keys Overseas Heritage Trail Century ride, my first ever bike packing trip, and just kind of wanted to go over my experience, cover the total cost, and just go over the itinerary that I followed and the strategy and approach I had to completing this ride. I feel like this can be a helpful video just to kind of wrap things up for anyone that's looking to do the same that I did. Before I get into the itinerary and costs for this trip, I just kind of wanted to cover a few different questions, a few different things about my overall experience. So first off, just the summary, the kind of brief headline overview here is that it's totally doable as a solo rider. Although it is a lot challenging, a lot more challenging than I expected, especially since I rode the entire 109 miles on a beach cruiser, which, to some people that's probably pretty crazy. And it was, it definitely was looking back at it. I don't know if I do it. Maybe I might do it again, a century ride in a beach cruiser. That might be in the works in the future, but it took a lot longer than I anticipated. When you look at Google Maps and put in bicycling for certain miles, just plan to double that allotted time that Google says. So that totally caught me by surprise. But it's overall it was a lot of fun, very very rewarding, but totally underestimated uh, the entire trip. So just plan to get up early, and things just taking a lot longer than you expect. So how many days, how many miles per day did I plan this trip for? So going into it, I think I planned it just right, although I would have liked to have had more time. So maybe an extra day or so just to see a few more sites. But the plan that I followed was 3 nights, 4 days. Now, I know that seems like a longer time for a bike rider, especially since there's people on YouTube on speed bikes and road bikes that have completed all 100 miles in one day. I just wanted to kind of take my time and see more things, which unfortunately did not happen. I spent the entire day cycling, but you probably could have completed this in 2 or 3 days. I completed it in four. I left like 4 or 5 miles for day four, so I really could have completed it in 3 days. But I found that this was actually just right if I started exactly at 6 a.m. and end at like 3 p.m. So almost a total of 7, 8 hours riding each day. Now, where did I camp? I camped at the state parks. There's a decent amount of state parks along the way, the entire length of the Keys. The first night I stayed at Bahia Honda State Park. The second night I stayed at Long Key State Park, and then the third night I stayed at John Pennycamp State Park. Now, uh, you may have the question of whether or not you could stealth camp along the way. Unfortunately, not really. I mean, you could find a few spots here and there, but the vegetation and like forests along the road, along the highway, are very thick and dense that it's really hard to fit a tent in anywhere. There may be a few spots if you have a small tent footprint and maybe under a bridge for some cowboy camping potentially, but there are signs along the way that say no camping. So, if the police catch you, I don't know, I can't speak to that. But maybe you could make it work. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not endorsing it, but I think you should, if you look a week before to see if there's any cancellations at those campsites I listed, there may be some. And also, so I spoke to all the camp counselors or camp managers at each of these campsites, and they say if you call ahead, like the day of, they can put aside a tent site or a tent spot for you. And you know, I know at least one of the camps had like cancellations that night that I showed up, and that one they specifically said, I think it was Long Key. Yeah, it was Long Key Park where they set aside an emergency tent spot for hikers, bikers, etc. But the other campsites, I think, if I remember correctly, they said they did have some extra area or some extra campsites for hikers and bikers the day of. So I'd suggest doing that. I think you'd be all set. And also, you don't want to stealth camp either because the Keys is littered with poison wood, poison wood trees, and that sap, if that drips on you, that shit can burn, or yeah, burn up your skin. So just be careful with that. Now, what would I have done differently now, knowing what I know now? I definitely would have allowed myself more days to do this because I felt like I was constantly stressed just getting from my campsite to the next one just in time before the sun went down. Didn't really have much time to kind of enjoy the surroundings. Also, would have brought along an inflatable sleeping pad since the campgrounds are gravel and very hard to sleep on. Although I did sleep fairly well, uh, I didn't really mind it. I used a towel and a ground sheet and then my tent bed. But honestly, I think, yeah, looking back, I probably would have brought an inflatable pad just to stuff in my backpack. And you can't bring one of those switchback sleeping pads. They're too bulky and they'd probably blow away in the wind if you somehow attach it to your backpack or your bike. I also would have brought a sleeping bag. I decided the last minute not to bring one because I thought it'd be too hot and too bulky, and I was able to kind of relieve some weight on my back. But overall, I kind of, in hindsight, I wish I did bring it because the temperature did drop down, uh, like in the middle of the night, which I wasn't expecting, but I should have because the campgrounds, I guess, generally tend to be a little bit cooler. And I was close to the ocean, so I would have brought a sleeping bag to stay a little bit warmer. I didn't freeze; it was fine, but the cold it did drop in temperature and it woke me up. Also, the sleeping bag probably could have doubled as an extra like padding layer. Another thing that I would have done differently too is bought a rear rack for my bicycle and also bought some saddlebags so I could actually pack my sleeping bag and my tent and everything in that instead of having it on my shoulders and my back because my shoulders were burning up. Like my shoulders just hurt the entire way from holding a backpack or from wearing a backpack. And also my lower back started to hurt too. And also my sit bones as well. I think if I packed everything in saddlebags and placed that on top of a rear rack, that would have alleviated a lot of stress from my shoulders and lower back. And then lastly, what to expect kind of going into this if you're planning a trip like this, something that I didn't know beforehand. So, just in regards to the trail, you have to be very mindful of the wind. That's something I didn't even think about was the headwind going into this. I know the first day I was fighting close to maybe 25, 30 mile an hour headwind because you're pedaling right along the coast and it was just brutal. It was extremely difficult to pedal head on directly into that. I don't think I was averaging more than 5 miles an hour and my legs were they were fried. I barely made it to camp that first day. I should have started a lot earlier. That was the other issue too. You're also battling daylight, especially in the wintertime. So you got to be mindful of the season you're doing it in. Also, some of the walkways or parts of the path were underwater, uh, which that's another thing to be mindful of too. Is if you're going during wet season, you may encounter some flooding, but not the highway. So if you stay on the highway on the shoulder, you won't encounter flooding there. But if you're planning to walk or bike the walkways, like the actual trail, then just be mindful of that. Also, on the shoulder, you have to be extremely alert of all the debris on the shoulder. You got nails, you have random pieces of wood, 4x4s, you have bungee cords, you have fish hooks you got to watch out for. I saw a lot of knives. I saw a lot of knives, which could pop your tire. Fishing net, steel net, it's just the list goes on. I the amount of crap that's on the shoulder. You also need to be mindful of the amount of times you have to cross back and forth on the highway if you plan to follow like the actual walkway, the actual heritage trail. I must have crossed over. I lost track. I lost count of how many times I had to cross back and forth on that over that highway. And that's another scary thing too. Is these cars are going what 60, 70 miles an hour. So you have to you have to be safe when you cross. Granted, there are spaces in traffic, a decent amount of gaps for you to cross, but still, just gotta think about that too. And the miles are very deceiving. You may think you're closer than you actually are. You may think you're actually further away than you actually are. So a phone mount or a GPS mount on your handlebar, just so you can see exactly where you're riding, is essential. So you don't have to stop every 10 minutes like I had to just to see where the hell I was going. You also need to be mindful of if the bridge actually crosses over the water. Some bridges don't. Some pedestrian bridges do not. Most of them are gated off, but some of them are not gated off. So if you cycle or walk the pedestrian bridge and it does not cross, and you have to backtrack. Okay, and that takes time. So always check Google Maps or Far Out app beforehand. Oh, and one other thing is the 7 Mile Bridge is not as bad as you think it is. If you get there early enough, there'll be less traffic. The shoulder is wide enough for you to at least feel somewhat safe crossing. But honestly, it's not that bad. The majority of cars tend to move over for you when they see you walking or biking. Construction, that's actually another major one. There's probably construction every couple miles, it seemed like. I was always running into something, whether it was like a dump truck blocking the entire walkway and bike path on the road. So I had to maneuver out into the traffic and get around it. The redirects or the reroutes, there'd be those barricades up where there wasn't enough room for me to go into the road, so I had to go to the side road or trying to find another way around it. You're always running into some sort of construction barricade site, or there's just some situation. There's so much construction going on during this trail, so that's just wanted to give you a heads up there. Okay, now let's jump into the itinerary and total cost for this ride. So I'm just going to go this. I'm going to go over this day by day for my itinerary, and also provide you the total cost over here in column E. I had this itinerary planned out in a Google spreadsheet. So for day 0, which is like the prep day, I had to pick up a rental car, which cost $74 just for one day. And since it was only halfway full when I picked it up, I had to fill it up with gas, and that cost a total of $41.68. So the total for that day already, before I'm even on the trail, was $115. Now for day 1, the actual day of the ride, on my way to Key West, I actually made a quick pit stop for a resupply to pick up a few like tuna packets or what have you for the ride. That was $6.76. Then I dropped off my rental car. And then the first stop I made, which was actually about 2 miles south of where the rental car location was Fort Zachary Taylor. Always wanted to see that park. So stopped there. And to enter that park, it was a total of $250. And then from there, I made my way over to the southernmost point buoy to film, to start my ride there and take some pictures and film. And then I was off, started riding. I think one of my first stops was a Shell gas station just to do another quick resupply. I think I picked up some coconut water and a banana because I tried to keep my pack light. I didn't want to carry any food or water if I didn't have to. And so that stop cost a total of $5.81. And then like around lunchtime, I stopped at this health food store that I thought was going to be better than it actually was. So I picked up some more food there, quick resupply, and that cost me $9.97. And then before I went into camp, I stopped for a late lunch at Tonio's Seafood Shack. I just got a basic meal there with some vegetables. I think it was like a chicken salad wrap or something like that, and that cost a total of 28.60. I always try to tip well um, when I'm on this journey, so I think I gave her above 20%. So that's why it cost a little bit more than what I expected. And then to stay over that night at the Bahia Honda State Park, it cost me a total of 49.70 for a day one total of $103. Moving on to day number two, my first stop before the 7 Mile Bridge was Veterans Memorial Beach Park, which is a free entry. So it didn't cost me anything there. After the 7 Mile Bridge, I stopped at Circle K for a quick resupply. I think some coconut water, banana. You know the drill. That cost me just under $5. And then I stopped at this cool coffee spot a little ways down the road. Uh, I gave him a good tip because he gave me some good insight on a healthy food store just a few miles up where I could get breakfast. And he was a cool guy. He had a nice little shop, so I tipped him like $3 or something. So I think overall the coffee cost like $4, like $4 or something. So that's how much the coffee was, $7. Then I made a quick stop at Walgreens to pick up a fleece blanket because it got a little cool in the middle of the night. So, like I mentioned earlier, so picked up that to stay a little warmer in the tent since I didn't have a sleeping bag. And then I stopped for, I think this should have been like around maybe 11:45. Then I stopped for lunch, breakfast, lunch, whatever, at Food for Thought, which was a healthy restaurant, and that cost me 26.76. The people were amazing in there too. They had a really good smoothie. They had a really good smoothie, so definitely check them out. Very healthy. Then before going into camp, I stopped for a resupply at Publix. I think I picked up a pub sub there for dinner that night. And then to the overnight stay at Long Key State Park was 34.52 for a total of 92.10 for day number two. Moving on to day number three. The first stop I made was to get some coconut water, hydrate myself before the ride at this quick stop, like literally 2 minutes from the camp. And that cost a total of $4.88. And then I continued my ride and stopped at this Midway Cafe and Coffee for food, and they had some really good gourmet coffees there. The food was delicious and healthy, so I definitely recommend stopping there. Just cost me over $20. And then I went to Founders Park. The entry fee there was $8. Beautiful park. The facilities were amazing. I definitely recommend stopping there. And then on my way out of there before camp, I again stopped at Publix for a quick resupply. I think I picked up, some either coconut water or a tuna or an extra tuna packet, or no, some fruit. I think I picked up fruit there for the next morning. And then I stopped at Hobo Cafe to eat a dinner before camp, and that held me over to the next morning. Hobo Cafe, another great spot. The food's delicious, right on the highway, so it's really easy access. They got a nice little patio area there in the back for hikers and bikers. They really take care of you there. So that was 31.18. And then to stay overnight at John Penny Camp, it was 49.70. So all these campsites are a lot cheaper than hotels or motels along the Keys. If you get a hotel or a motel on the key in the Keys, it's easily $150 a night, easy. So that's why I opted try to get the campgrounds if you can. And then day number four, this was just a 4 or 5 mile ride to the Dagny Trailhead. And then that day, I also had to pick up and rent another car, right, to transport myself back to where I live in Florida. And the cost for that day, unfortunately, was $10 more at $84. So the total for day four was 84. And did I say the total for day three? Total the total amount for day three was 118. So the total cost for my entire trip was $514.15. So plan your costs accordingly. Total for lodging, if we just look at that real quick, where's my lodging? Was $133. So for all 3 nights, that costs what it would cost for less than what it would be for one night in a hotel or a motel in the Keys. So just keep that in mind. If you can get a campground, do it. But if you need to get a motel, then yeah, there is some cheaper ones. And when I say cheaper, you're talking like 125, 150 a night. Okay, so just expect to pay that if you don't get a campground. Okay, guys, I hope this was helpful. That is the approach I took. That's the amount of money I spent for this trip. Hope that was valuable and hope it helps if you intend to do a self supported solo ride yourself.